Sahaviryam Karavavahi Tejasvinavadhidamastu Ma Vidvishavahi Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. So, yesterday we were discussing this particular portion of the Gita, the second chapter from 55th to 72nd verse, a graphic description of a spiritually enlightened person, how he lives in this world. In the 5th chapter, there is a very picturesque description of such a person as, what is the psychology of non-attachment? Is a very interesting description. In the 10th verse of the 5th chapter, Lord Krishna sums up, gives a summary of the psychology of non-attachment. How a person who is active 24 hours of the day in different professions, engage in different responsibilities, the performance of different responsibilities. How does he keep his mind in a state of perfect calmness, tranquility? The verse is 11th one. Kayena manasa buddhya kevalehi indriyairapi yogina karma kurvanti sangam tyaktva atma shuddhaya. The description. So a yogi here literally means a Vedanti. Yoga is nothing but the union of the individual soul with the universal soul, which is the essence of Vedanta, the goal of Vedanta. So a yogi works with his body, his mind, his intellect, and also with all the 5 senses of perception and 5 senses of action. Always active. As I said yesterday, yoga to be understood should be understood in the light of its functional nature, how it really functions in our daily life, how it is applied in daily life. The point is Sangam Tyaktva Atma Shuddhaya. Sangam means giving attachment. Really, it is not detachment. It is getting rid of attachment, giving up attachment. It is not detachment that is meant. Detachment, as I mentioned yesterday, may be interpreted with a slightly negative connotation. You become indifferent. You have no contact with anything. But here you do have contact with the world, apparently. Apparently in the sense because you are not obsessed or attached in a very slavish way. It is not attachment in the sense that your mind gets obsessed with worldly desires or responsibilities. If we can work without obsession, if we can work without obsession, that is non-attachment. So, giving up attachment, then can we really work without a goal in mind? Maybe when we really work, we can't do that. Psychologically speaking, you cannot leave your mind in a state of emptiness or vacuum. You may have read about Buddhist the doctrine of emptiness. The Bible of the doctrine of the philosophy of emptiness, it's called Shunyavada, is the Madhyamika Karika, sometimes called Mula Madhyama Shastram or Madhyama Shastram. It's a Sanskrit word written by Nagarjuna, who wrote it maybe around 3rd century. Different dates are there, according to scholars, 4th or 3rd century AD. It's called Madhyamika Karika, Madhyama Shastram. There he says the absolute reality is Shunyata, means emptiness. But then he goes on describing what this emptiness is. He says this emptiness is non-dualistic. It is beyond description. It is beyond words. And when you realize this this emptiness, when you really understand this emptiness, then you get a sense of inner blissfulness. So, according to Nagarjuna, there are 2 fundamental truths. One is the absolute reality, which is shunya, which is emptiness. The other is this worldly, sensory, empirical reality. So both they admit, but he says once you realize the absolute reality, shunyata. Deshemi shunyata satyam. There's a verse in the Madhyamika Karya. So Buddha teaches the philosophy of emptiness or shunyata. But shunyata is also described as indescribable, but non-dualistic, and something that gives you a sense of inner fulfillment or inner blissfulness. How can you really have blissfulness if you experience your identity with the total vacuum? So, according to later commentators like Chandragirti and other later Buddhist commentators, the shunyata is not an all-exclusive zero, it is an all-inclusive zero. These are two opposites. An all-inclusive zero means it is an absolute reality, it is called emptiness. All-exclusive zero means it is total vacuum, which cannot be the reality. So, the point is, can we really function in this world in total vacuum with the mind completely empty? No purpose, no plan, no intention, no drive, no motive, no. So, you need a goal, a guiding principle for every action. Not only physical action, even for intellectual action, intellectual ideation as they call it sometimes. Forming an idea, a flash thought in your mind, it will always need a premise, a foundation. So Lord Krishna says, and interestingly, he doesn't mention God here. That is the uniqueness of this philosophy of Vedanta. Vedanta philosophy accepts the idea of a monotheistic God, but goes beyond that. Without rejecting, it goes beyond that. So Atma Shuddhi, for one's own inner purity. Every unselfish action breaks the bondage, the chains that bind you to this world. And every selfish action binds it all the more tightly to this world. That is psychology of attachment and detachment. Attachment binds you, as Vivekananda says, Swami says. It breaks the freedom. It binds you to this world with an iron chain, sometimes golden chain also. But still, it is a chain. You may not like to remain in a state of bondage, even if you are bound to a lamppost by a golden chain, because it makes no difference in the quality of bondage, whether you're chained to a post by an iron chain or a steel chain or a golden chain. You won't be proud, I'm bound by a golden chain, my hand and foot. Still, it is lack of freedom. So, this chain should be broken. For that, you need a purpose. Otherwise, you can't do. So, Atma Shuddhi, for one's own mental purity. So, this can be experienced by anybody. Even the most worldly minded person can feel this relaxation that comes to you when one link of this chain is broken, when it vanishes. You just cross the street and you find a blind man standing on the other side of the road. He is looking for somebody to come to his rescue, to help him. And you just take him across the street. You don't get any remuneration, and there is no journalist watching you to give your photo in newspapers. Nobody is aware of it. The blind man certainly is not aware of who is taking him across the street. There is nobody. But when you reach home, you feel a kind of inner fulfillment. Where does it come from? But if you become a skeptic, then that will be broken. You put cold water over all this. So if you have a positive mind, oh, I have done a wonderful thing. Nobody else knows that. Your own inner self knows that. not the mind, it is the Atman. The Atman suddenly gets a higher level of purity. A little bit of dust that covers your mind is wiped off when you take a blind man across the street. So that's what really happens. There is a very interesting scene in the Nobel-winning classic of Tagore, Gitanjali. Gitanjali, in many ways, is a. Of course, I read only the English translation. Here and there, Bangla original work. It is nothing but a translation of many of the Upanishad statements. Surprisingly, if anybody has read the Upanishads, he won't find anything new in Gitanjali. See, a God who walks with a stick in his hand, whether it's a child, a girl, a woman, or the helpless old man with a stick in his hand, all the images are Tumha Kumari, Utava Kumari, you find them, then Dena Vanchasi, all these one, this Vedasra Upanishad and elsewhere. See, now there is one interesting picturesque description of what I was trying to explain right now. A beggar was standing in a street corner, and he has with him a small bag full of rice, not good rice or bad rice, sometimes mix up because people give him alms. Maybe he is a mendicant, a Buddhist mendicant perhaps, because they live their life through mendicancy. Now, the bag is full of grains of rice. Now suddenly he found a procession moving from a distance. A king was marching along the street, followed by his retinue, his paraphernalia, ministers and others. He was riding on a golden chariot. The king approaches the beggar, and the beggar probably expected the king to distribute gold coins around, as they do sometimes, maybe in medieval times. But when the king was so well dressed, riding a golden chariot, reached the beggar, he stretched out his arms. So Tagore, the English translation is, and the king approached and stretched out his arms to the beggar to beg. That's the word, the original English translation. So he stretched out his arms towards the beggar to beg. And the beggar was a very miserly person. He had worked very hard to fill his bag full of rice. So he took the tiniest grain of rice, not a handful. The tiniest grain of the rice he selected from his bag and placed it in the hands of the king. And the king marched on. In the evening, after his usual round of begging in the streets, the beggar reached his home, maybe in a state of homelessness perhaps. And there he emptied his bag and he found a tiny grain of gold. So the grain that he has given to the king has become a gold coin, a golden grain, and he went perhaps, in that there ends that particular paragraph. So the point is, when we do the smallest or the least of an unselfish act without any selfish motive, when we link ourselves to higher reality, then we become only an instrument in the hands of the higher reality. The higher reality, you may call him God or whatever you want. It's better to call him God. That God starts functioning through you. In fact, that is the explanation of the great men and women, mystics and philosophers and saints and sages who achieved great things within short lifespan. See, Vivekananda practically worked only for 9 years, 1893 to 1902, and we are sitting here discussing all this. And he didn't spend more than just a few months in California. So you can imagine. So, or any great spiritual person, belonging to any religious tradition, or maybe no religious tradition at all. So when they become totally unselfish, when they become totally established in mental purity, they cease to be small little individuals. They assume universal proportions. Their stature becomes universal, and they achieve and accomplish marvelous things in short lifespan. That's a mystery. So what have Sangam Tyaktva Atma Shuddhai? Vedanta approaches this topic from two different angles. One, from the angle of mental purity, and other, the angle of universal goodness, welfare of others. Either Lokasangraha means you either work for the good of others or you work for your own good. Both are the same. When you work for the good of others, our mind becomes pure, and when we become pure in mind, it's a great blessing to the whole world. So that is the psychology of non-attachment. Now, in the earlier verses, Lord Krishna says, in fact, he gives a very practical picture of this Vedanta philosophy in its most elementary form, in its applied aspect. Naiva kinchit karomiti yukto manyeta tattvavid pasyan srinvan visprasan jignan asnan getchan sopan shusan. And then Pralaban, Visisan, Granhan, Unmission, Nimission Nabi. Indriyani Indriyartheshu Vartante. Idikaya means. Vartante is the end with that. According to Sandhi rules, it becomes Vartanta when it's followed by vowel sound. Vartanta. Vartante idithari. The meaning is this. So what are the life situations mentioned here? Even when you see different objects, when you hear noises, when you handle things by touching them, when you smell, when you eat, when you converse with people, when you hold different things, maybe when you are engaged in different duties and responsibilities, when you walk, when you give up, when you accept, when you wink your eyes, when your eyes are opened or when your eyes are closed, when you are sleeping, when you are dreaming, when you are deep sleep. All the time what happens is the senses are occupied with their object. That should be our approach. So senses are engaged in the duties and responsibilities. This should be our conviction. And then, but I am the Atman, I am not the doer. So we interpret ourselves to be the doer when we interpret ourselves to be this body, mind, intellect complex. When we can look upon ourselves as a witness of the drama of our own life, then we can feel relaxed even at the time of being engaged in work. As I said earlier, when we link ourselves to a higher reality, then we become mighty, wonderful, grand, beautiful, sublime instruments in the hands of the universal spirit. And then suddenly, great things happen in our life. The pen should not assert freedom. It should not declare, it should not make a declaration of independence when you write an article with a pen or pencil in our hands. The pencil has no right to proclaim declaration of independence. Then what we want to write, we won't be able to write. The pen should completely surrender to our will. The pen doesn't lose anything. The pen or the pencil becomes a mighty big instrument in the hands of a Wordsworth, a Shankara, or a Milton, or a Homer, or a Valmiki, or a Vyasa. Great world journals, universal classics are written. Because many pencils did not declare their freedom of independence. They submitted to the wills of a Dostoevsky, or a Vyasa, or a Homer, and Shakespeare. So we got great classics. Similarly, if we can surrender, it is not a surrender in the sense of slavery. Rather, it is a surrender that expands our dimension. We become greater, we become bigger, as a pencil becomes a mighty instrument in the hands of a Shakespeare. Similarly, we become a mighty instrument in the hands of the universal spirit when we practice this non-attachment. That's why Sangam Tektva Atma Shuddhi, giving up attachment, remaining non-attachment. And then what happens in the 10th verse? Brahmani adhaya karmani sangam tiktva karoti yaha lipyade nasapapena padmapatram iva ambhasa. So you can see this, a lotus leaf doesn't become wet or drenched in water. Of course, it lies flat in water. You can push it underneath the water level, but it doesn't get wet or drenched. It remains dry. So similarly, even when we are active for 24 hours, engaged in different actions and duties and responsibilities, still you will be able to remain totally detached, in the sense non-attached, and we will have no anxiety, no problem, no depression. If the results did not, if results are not up to the expectation, we won't be depressed, disappointed. If the results are beyond expectations, we won't be overjoyed. The point is, the only way to avoid problems is not to seek happiness. If you look for happiness, it's very clear that whatever we want to do, whatever we want to achieve, whatever we want to enjoy, it never happens. Something will be left out. Otherwise, life cannot go on. So, but at the same time, we'll be able to accomplish many things. So, when we work hard without attachment, what happens? We'll be able to put our whole energy, concentration, power of concentration, focus on the work we are doing. And the work will be very effective. And the results naturally will be outstanding, as you can always find in the lives of great men and women who worked without attachment. All the great things in the world were achieved. The great contributions came only from those who worked without attachment. I can give a very simple example. Suppose you want to write a poem or a novel, very ordinary things. You think hard, make elaborate preparations, and every day you decide from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. I will write a poem. Nobody will come forward to read that poem. A poem cannot be written the way a carpenter manufactures a table. So all the great things, even inspiration, what we call inspiration, it goes beyond instinct, it goes beyond reason. The source of inspiration is the higher universal spirit. And when this inspiration is behind great poems, great poetry, great painting, great musical compositions, great philosophical classics, novels, all these take shape when this goddess of inspiration blesses the artists. Otherwise, nobody will come forward to read. I know, among my friends, there are many who have written more than 100 books. They work very hard. They are very punctual. Almost they live like a soldier in office in the military barracks. But all mostly dead, lifeless words. Well written, extremely well bound, but absolutely worthless. On the other hand, if you read the great works that came from great artists who never made any preparation, you find you read it again and again. Gita is one example. Lord Krishna didn't make elaborate preparations to preach this. It came of its own in a battlefield. He suddenly found a good soldier, good man of action suddenly becomes deluded. He thought inaction, running away from duties and responsibility was a great thing. And so Sri Krishna decided to call the bluff. That's how this great classic came into existence. So the point is, this inspiration doesn't come to you unless you become yourself an instrument in the hands of the universal spirit. And this happens when we attach ourselves to the higher spiritual reality. And this attachment comes when you detach yourself from lower empirical desires and motives. So when we are in a state of total detachment or non-attachment from lower empirical things and desires, we automatically get attached to a higher spiritual reality. And then great things happen. That's the psychology, applied psychology of attachment that you find in the Gita. Now we'll go back to the elaborate description of the Sthita Prajna in the second chapter that we already discussed to some extent yesterday. So in the 55th verse, the beginning of the instruction, Lord Krishna tells Arjuna, Dukkeshu aniddigna manaha sukheshu vigadaspraha vitadaga bhayakrodha siddhihi munihi uchyate. Who is the spiritually enlightened person? A person whose mind is not agitated, even in adversity. And a person who is free from desire, and who is totally devoid of any kind of attachments. He has no anger, no fear. Now, that again takes us to the problem of the psychology of non-attachment. How do we remain free from agitation when we face a problem? There are two levels of approaching this subject. One, from a purely psychological, rather empirical point of view. We all know very well that the incident or the episode that may cause agitation will pass away. It is a momentary phenomenon. It's not eternal. Nothing in this world is going to last for long. At least it never lasts forever. So once we keep this in mind, the non-eternal nature of all these adversities, the moment we remember the situation that creates agitation and adversity may pass away, may something else, it will give way to another kind of experience, maybe a pleasant, happy situation. Once we keep that in mind, we may have to solve the problem, we may have to confront the problem, solve the problem. We cannot remain inactive, but we won't be agitated. So the only difference is we can remain in a state of tranquility and calmness, completely free from agitation, when we face a challenge, an adversity. The adversity will be there. That's part of the game of life. But agitation is not unavoidable. It could be avoided if we can take a different perspective. But that is the psychological implication of that the Buddhist doctrine of momentariness. Buddha used to emphasize this. So in the early writings of Buddha, in the it is called the three baskets in English, called Pidagas. Tripidagas, three canonical classics. Sutta Pidaga, Vinaya Pidaga and Abhidhamma Pidaga, which Buddha preached in Prakrit, and later on in the second Buddhist council in Kandy in Sri Lanka, maybe 250 years after Buddha's passing away, they wrote down all these teachings from Prakrit into Pali script. So we got these three Pidagas, Sutta Pidaga, Vinaya Pidaga, Abhidhamma Pidaga. So the main central theme of these canonical literature is the reality of grief, the four noble truths about sorrow or grief, Sattvari, Adi, Satyani, as they used to call. And also the way out of this trap of sorrow is called Ashtanga Marga, means the eightfold path to come out of this trap. Now, the most important psychological element in Buddha's humanistic moral philosophy enshrined in these three fundamental canonical classics is the reality of momentariness of the empirical life phenomena. And that is very important. Most of the problems we face, conflicts and agitations, we face because we forget this particular fact that these things are not eternal. In the flow of time, different experiences come one after another. So, momentariness of these empirical phenomena is a reality, but we forget that. And instead, we interpret them as eternal realities. So we become agitated. A problem is really not such a big, disastrous dilemma if we remember that the conditions that created a problem will change after some time. So, this attitude becomes natural to a sthita prajna, means a spiritually enlightened person. So, even in adversity, he is in a state of total calmness, free from agitation. Dukkeshu anuddivnamana, sukheshu vigdaspraha. But this has got an equally important aspect. The state of non-agitation in adversity is one side of the coin. The other side of the same coin is a state of complete freedom from desire. If you have desire, then there is no freedom from agitation. That is seen in the Buddha's concept of pratiti samutpada, the 12-link chain that explains the process of transmigration. Trishna or desire is the fundamental cause. That is linked to ignorance of our real nature. So if you are free from desire, then we can be free from agitation. So the question is how to remain free from desire and still be active, whether you are a student, whether you are an official, whatever may be your profession or job. How to be active in this world of everyday realities and still be free from desire. Again, this freedom from desire technically is possible if you remember that what you are going to achieve, all the desires that may be fulfilled in course of time cannot bring eternal happiness. The sense of satisfaction or joy or happiness that you may experience when all desires are fulfilled is momentary. So remember this momentariness. Then one advantage is we can sit in a gallery and watch the whole drama, not only other people's lives, but our own life being played out in the stage. You know, the difference between an actor who is part of the drama group and a spectator who is sitting in the front seat in the gallery is the spectator may feel sorrow and grief when something tragic happens on the stage. And even in a comedy, maybe the spectator, the one who is watching, witnessing the drama or a play, may share the happiness of the actors, of the characters on the stage. But he knows that maybe a terrible tragedy has happened, Shakespearean tragedies, Greek tragedies, has happened on the stage. But when the curtain falls, it's all over. He can go and stay in his 5-star hotel. So he's agitated, he's unhappy, he shares the grief with the characters, but that doesn't make him miserable. Why? Because he's just a witness. He's just a witness. So a spiritually enlightened person can remain in this world as a witness. As I said, like a lotus leaf remaining dry without getting drenched or wet, even when it is in the river or lake. Padmapatram iva ampasa means We already discussed that subject. Now this same problem can be discussed from the perspective of the actors. You can compare the situation of a great Oscar award winning actor who plays the role of a miserable beggar. He may get an Oscar award because he may look much more beggarly, miserable, wretched than a professional beggar in the street. But all his wretchedness only enables him to get an Oscar award, millions of dollars, and he knows that after the makeup is removed, he'll go and stay in the 5-star hotel. So he's not affected by this. He may look miserable. He may look agitated. He may look wretched. But he will be completely in a state of calmness within. Misery is only on the face. It is just a contortion of facial muscles. The poverty, even if you look at him, you may feel like giving him, tossing out $1 bill. But then, it's all momentary. But compare that with a real beggar. His misery, his wretchedness, his pain, all real. Now, a Vedantin can be like an actor. A non-Vedantin may have to be like a real beggar. When he's playing different roles on this world stage of life. Vedantin can be either like a witness, spectator, watching the whole drama, or like an actor whose misery is not real. Because at his heart he knows that he will have to put up a good show to get an award. But it is only a contortion, a play of his facial muscle, nothing more. He is not unhappy at heart. But real beggar will be terribly unhappy. So if you are attached, you will be the real beggar. Attachment makes us real beggars. Every misery becomes pain, sorrow, sadness, a feeling of completely being lost. Every little, small, momentary experience of grief and sorrow is like a heavy burden, hammer blow. But if you are on the other hand an actor, then the mightiest hammer blow on the stage will be different from touch of a feather. Nothing, there is no pain. So that's a real. So non-attachment enables you to sit and watch in the gallery and play the drama of your own life as a witness. Non-attachment enables you to play the role of a beggar as an actor and not to live the life of a beggar in the street. If you are attached, you have to live the life of a beggar in the street, in this drama of human life. So that is the real psychology of non-attachment in this Gita. Mahatma Gandhi wrote his classic Anasakti Yoga. He interpreted the entire Gita classic as a science of non-attachment. That is Gandhi's perspective. If it saved Gandhi, you remember, you look at Gandhi's life. The man was busy mobilizing 380 million people, maybe for more than that, 420 million people in the subcontinent, agitating and mobilizing them into political agitation against foreign rulers. He was not remaining in a hermitage, sitting, meditating. It would be easy for him, but he didn't do that. He was a well-educated barrister. So, and he was busy all the time. But then, when he was breathing his last, he saw 3 times. What did he do? He didn't cry and weep. He said, you took the name of God and just left this world as you leave one room to another room. So this is Gandhi. You know why I'm giving the example of Gandhi? In India, there have been hundreds of such people who could live like that. But many of them were saints and sages and philosophers, living hermit. Great religious preachers and mystics, great gigantic spiritual teachers. Gandhi doesn't belong, conventionally, Gandhi doesn't belong to the category of a mystic or a saint. But he was a great mystic and saint, no doubt, but he doesn't belong to that category in a very conventional way. He was a great, very shrewd politician, mind you. You can read the writings of his biographers. Very, very shrewd, very clever, very intelligent person. But all his put to the service of serving humanity, serving his nation. When he was in South Africa, he was working for the emancipation, for the freedom, for equality of the African natives, not for Indians. He was not in that way. He looked upon himself as a universal citizen. In India, of course, he worked for India's independence. But this Gandhi, when he was shot, he was not crying and weeping. And he said, and he uttered the name of God 3 times and left his body. He could do that because all his life, every act, so you find Kayena, Manasa, Buddhya, Kevalehi, Indriyavi, Yogina Karma Kurvandi, Sankam Tektu Atmashuddhe, the Gita says, with body, with mind, with intellect, with the senses of perception, senses of action, with all days, he worked, he acted. But dedicating all his action, Brahmani Athaya Karmani, means dedicating to Brahman, technically speaking, surrendering the fruits to God. And therefore, he could remain in a state of total non-attachment. So, that enables you to watch the strange phenomenon of your own life as a drama being played out on the stage and you remaining as a witness on the gallery. That's the greatness of Gandhi, that's the greatness of the relevance of this psychology of non-attachment. Again, 56, yes sarvatra nabhisneha tatat prape shubha ashubham na abhinandadi na dveshti tasya prajna patishtita. So again it continues. You don't have a self-centered affection, means a love for your own, love for your own people, whom you consider to be yours and to the exclusion of all others. It doesn't mean that you can be friends with everyone. As I said earlier, you can't invite the bears to come and sit on this retreat. You can't interact with people whose association may bring us peril, risk. You can't do that. So in the Bhagavata Purana also, in real life you have to be slowly evolved from a state of discerning mind to a kind of universal unity and oneness. But still, you won't be obsessed with slavish obsession with any sensory objects, and you are not jubilant, you are not overjoyed when the situations are very favorable, and you are not agitated, you don't hate anything when the situations are not favorable, and you don't praise anyone beyond the limit, and you don't hate anyone beyond the limit. Na abhinandadi, na dveshti. We had to recognize people and their virtues, and we had to be careful about dealing with people whose characteristics may not be very helpful, but then that doesn't go beyond a limit. That does not go beyond a limit. I mean, you don't become yourself a slave linked by an iron chain to the things of this empirical world. That's the idea behind. And yesterday we discussed the psychology of getting attached to worldly things, dhyayado, vishayan, pumsa, etc. How we get attached to worldly things, and when we try to achieve those things, and if we don't achieve, then we lose our temper, and slowly we become depressed, we become angry. So, sammoha smriti vibhramsar buddhinasat pranasyati. Finally, we lose our total equilibrium, balance of mind. Now, there is another, in the 64th and 65th verse, there are two interesting ideas discussed. Ragadvesha viyuktaistu vishayan indriyeshcharan atmavasya vidheyatma prasadam adhigacchati. Prasade sarvadukhanam hanirasya upajayade prasanna chedaso hiyashu buddhi paryavatishthate. Two verses, very important. I was talking about the feeling of inner fulfillment, inner contentment that we normally experience when we do something noble, when we think a noble thought, when a noble idea flashes in the mind. Suddenly, we feel a kind of inner fulfillment. Oh, we have done something wonderful, which really has a soothing effect, tranquilizing effect on an agitated mind. That's what the topic that's being discussed in the 64th and 65th words. So here you find a person with a disciplined mind, who has his senses under perfect control, who has no obsessive attraction and no obsessive hostility, aversion for any sense objects. He remains in a state of tranquility, he attains a state of tranquility, though he may be living in the midst of all these objects. So a person like this can meditate even in a marketplace, if he has his mind under perfect control. How do we do that? Always allow our mind to focus on the higher reality. Link our mind to something higher and sublime. That's the only way to prevent it from being linked to something lower and ephemeral and transitory. All the problems arise when our mind is always linked to something lower, something changeable, something that comes now and disappears next moment. So mind is happy when it comes, it becomes unhappy when the object that made it happy disappears next moment. So what really happens? We cannot keep our mind deliberately away from this. But one thing can be done: give a positive spiritual orientation to the mind by linking it to something else. How do we link it? From a psychological point of view, there is only one way. Remember constantly the momentariness, the perishable, the non-eternal nature of all these empirical things. And when we remind ourselves of the momentariness of these things, then mind gets automatically linked to something which is not momentary. Once we realize the momentariness of all these worldly things, then immediately and simultaneously the mind gets linked to something which is not momentary, which is eternal. And that is Atman, or God. And then what happens? Attains prasadam. Prasada is not offered food. Prasada here means serenity, tranquility, inner peace and poise. As I said, very simple thing. You walk in the street without being noticed by anybody, you toss out a $2 bill to a poor person, helps a person to cross the street. Or if you can't do that, sit in your room and think some noble, peaceful thoughts without any selfish motive. That's why before we start meditation or japa or spiritual practice, according to one school of conservative tradition, is we must wish or pray for the good of the whole world. We must pray for the good and welfare and peace of the whole world, the humanity. Because that brings in a state of tranquility and peace. It is prasada. The prasada is a very difficult thing to achieve, inner serenity. I gave this example maybe some days back, when our devotees work hard to put up the tent for which they are not paid, and they won't be recognized, given a special recognition for this. Or when you do any kind of, in a church maybe, in a synagogue, in a temple, maybe if you are in a school, but without expecting your names to appear in the newspapers or expecting an award, then you suddenly feel, oh, you have done something good. And that is a flash of this prasada, inner tranquility. And incidentally, consciously or unconsciously, Everyone is trying to seek this tranquility. Sometimes they try drugs to get this, because they are under the notion that if they can forget and run away from the miserable realities of everyday life, they will get this. Actually, things are going to be much worse. They drink. They want to run away. Every such attempt is an attempt to run away from worldly things. Running away from worldly things will not help you, because worldly things will follow you, chase you with a vengeance. That happens. If you run away from the world will follow you, chase you with a vengeance, with strong determination. There is no way out. So the only way is to give a spiritual orientation to the world of ideas, world of activities, etc. And that gives us this prasadam. So prasadi sarvadukhanam khani asya upajayade prasanna chedaso hyasu buddhi paryavadishthade. That is 65th verse. So when you attain this prasadam, this inner tranquility, peace or serenity, a sense of inner fulfillment, feeling that you have done something wonderful, you get a soothing experience in your mind. Then what happens? Proportionately, all frictions, all conflicts, all agitations come to an end. Or in direct proportion to the emergence of this inner tranquility, sorrows also start vanishing. And then what happens? Slowly the intellect and mind become established in a state of perfect equality and steadiness. So we don't have more time. We have interaction for maybe about 30 minutes. This is the last session of the retreat. So you can ask some questions, not only based on what we discussed today, but also based on what we have been discussing all these 9 days. So just about 30 minutes.
Swami, I have a question. Could you talk a little bit about how a person can have the psychology of non-attachment with respect to the impending death of loved ones?
Death,
yeah. And if it's going to happen soon, and any regrets a person may have in connection to this person.
Yes. Now, one point is in Vedanta and Yoga and many of the Eastern traditions, death is not the end of the journey of life. Death is not a full stop. It is only a comma or a semicolon. And secondly, I can just narrate an interesting episode from one of the classics dealing with this same subject. A king had a son, and here his 20th year, the king was thinking of retiring. He wanted to declare his son as the heir apparent, to crown him as the next king. And all preparations were made in the palace. And that Prince Pal dies one night, unexpectedly. Now the royal couple were very much agitated, upset. Ministers all were crying and weeping. So many tried to console the mother and father, but didn't succeed. And then a great sage appears before them, Narada, a great philosopher sage. So they told Narada the whole thing. So Narada tried to console the king, but my mother and father both, but they could not be consoled. Then Narada, through his divine powers, brings this son back to his life. The prince got up as he was asleep. And then the Narada asked him, look here, your parents are weeping and crying. Why don't you console them? Then the prince looked around. Which parents? He had thousands of parents lining up. In his previous life, he had another set of parents. So he didn't know. So he was the Jivatma, the individual soul. We just gone through so many lives, so many parents, so many sets of brothers, sisters, and so on. So one point to remember is, body is bound to perish and body cannot remain eternal. But within the body there is a reality in Atman which won't die when the body dies. So death is not the end of the journey. That's one angle. The other perspective is death is inevitable. One of the greatest mysteries is that we all know that everyone will die. But sometimes or most of the time when we do physical exercise, when we become obsessed with attachment to the body, tonics and things, then for a moment we somehow delude ourselves into thinking that this body won't die, body will remain eternal. Without the help of this delusion, we won't be able to look after the body so well. That's another psychological thing. If everyone who takes medicine every time remembers this body is not going to last, he won't take medicine. So even to be able to take medicine, do regular exercise, to go about your duties and responsibilities, for some time you need this delusion, this ignorance. But in the midst of all this, we must remember that this body, this life is not going to be eternal. So there are two approaches in this problem. One, we have to remember that death is not the end of everything. We have died so many times in the past. This is not the first time that person is going to die. Secondly, it is inevitable, it is unavoidable. Only the time is uncertain, but the reality is always there, that life is not going to be eternal. So these are the 2-3 different methods. And again, it is not going to be a permanent experience. The agitation will remain for some time, but gradually it will be. When we remember that we also belong to the same category, people who have died in the past so many times, then I don't think there will be any need or any logic for getting agitated or grief-stricken beyond a limit. Within the human limits, we should feel the sorrow. That is only humanness. But beyond the limit, when it goes, we should know that it is not unique to the particular person who dies, or to us to experience the death of near and dear ones. That's it. There are two different approaches in this matter.
Swami, in a way that speaks more to dealing with our own death rather than dealing with the death of those we care for. And I think the question comes in, how do we feel this detachment or non-attachment when someone we care for very deeply is dying or dies?
We have to constantly remind ourselves the fact that he can't live forever. That's a reality. It doesn't take much time or effort, intellectual effort, to remind ourselves that human body is not going to last forever. Everyone knows that. But problem is we forget it for a moment. But again, constant reading and reminding, effort to remind ourselves, this will be helpful. It is true, we feel the pain, the separation very miserably. True. But then there is no way out of this natural feeling of misery and sorrow. But when it goes beyond the limits, this constant self-reminder will be helpful. In fact, one of the mysteries mentioned in the Mahabharata is everyone sees people dying every day. But then, and everyone thinks that she herself, or maybe near and dear ones, we are going to live forever. It's a great mystery. That is described as one of the greatest wonders of the world. What is obvious to everyone, we forget frequently. So we remember many things, but what is so very obvious, happening right in front of our eyes every day, we forget. That's true. So we should remember, that's the difference between Vedantic and non-Vedantic. That's the difference between an enlightened spiritual seeker and others. That's why he said in these matters, strong faith in all these great teachings is necessary. Very often this grief is linked to skepticism or a tendency to doubt everything. Actually, if there is something certain about anything in this world, it is death. That's the most certain thing. We are sure about many things which are really uncertain. But we become so doubtful, skeptical about things which is really certain. That's the paradox of human life. So the story is we can imagine what happens to the king. And the king, the royal couple were immediately consoled because they found that their own son is not able to recognize them. Which suddenly made them think, oh, this is going to happen to us also. And they were free from sorrow. But they found a son, that individual soul, shot up. He got up, winked, and he thought, oh, looking around. He didn't recognize the ministers, his own parents. Who are they? He asked the philosopher. They seemed to be worried. Why don't you recognize them? The philosopher, the sage, Narada, told him, they are your parents. I hear the ministers. Whose parents? I have so many parents in the past. So, it is a very hard thing, of course. But it is so very obvious. So, as we become spiritually more and more mature, we are able to recognize many such obvious universal truths.
One in the extension of the same question, and the question is how to apply this principle of non-attachment in a situation where the departed soul is the one who we were the recipient of total love, unselfishness. So it's true that everybody has to die and so forth, that part is this. But here we were the recipients of all that love, affection, wisdom and whatnot from the, how do we practice non-attachment from that and be able to remain tranquil and...
Yes, if you are referring to a spiritual tradition, the answer is very simple. In our spiritual tradition, we look upon Sri Ramakrishna, the central figure, the source of everything. Everybody else is a conduit or maybe vehicle, an instrument through which this great spiritual tradition flows towards you. If you are linked to the individual instrument through which Sri Ramakrishna's blessing flew to you, to the exclusion of Sri Ramakrishna's source itself, then you are heading for danger. That creates misery. In fact, that's great teachers themselves used to remind their own disciples that they represent the higher spirit, universal spiritual reality. So we should not forget the source. If you forget the source, and if you just concentrate, focus on the medium through which that spiritual blessing flowed towards you, then it's a terrible mistake. The source remains eternal. The source is still there. If you pray to the source, it remains still. It is already there. So it's very important always to look beyond the conduit, beyond the vehicle, the instrument through which the spiritual blessing came to you. You have to look beyond it, and you have to focus on the link or the source, the original source. So that is very important. And in a way, that's exactly the instruction that comes from the teachers. All the teachers in our tradition, they always tell you they represent, they are vehicles, they are instruments through which the blessing of Sri Ramakrishna operates. If you forget that, and you look upon the tool, the instrument itself as the supreme source, is a great mistake, and not only that, you lose the spiritual touch. See, you cut the wire, it's only a piece of dead wire. You connect it to the plug, then you get electricity, you can use for light energy, heat energy, whatever may be the form of energy. But you cut its link to the source, you don't think of the source. It's only dead wire. In fact, that was even Sri Ramakrishna's disciples always emphasized, hammered upon this thing again and again. The great disciples of Sri Ramakrishna, including Vivekananda, did what is Swami Vivekananda said ultimately. Whatever good I have done, it's all because of the blessings of my master. The great Vivekananda himself. And whatever something went wrong, it's my burden. Okay.
Swami, the other day you mentioned death as an opportunity. I mean, at the time of death, thinking of the good things you have done. And so in departing, since we have to be active, can we help people in a dying situation think of the opportunity that death brings? Because it brings a new life. You're going to move from one body to another, and your thoughts at the time of death may determine your opportunity in your next life.
That's why when people are dying, the best way you can help them is to make them somehow remember God or higher spiritual things. You read good scriptures to them. You know, in Kaiser, I took up the photo of Holy Mother and showed before Prabhupada. I did that in the Kaiser hospital. So whenever anybody, children for that matter, anybody, the best service you can do is to read out. If they can't hear, if they can see, show before them. If they can't see or if they cannot hear or see, then even if you read yourself touching them, touching the body, that also helps. So somehow to create a spiritual atmosphere around, that's the greatest service one can do to your near and dear ones who are about to depart. That's the best thing anyone can do. And the worst thing is to create an agitation in front of them.
Swami, one place
You have to remember, see Swami Ashokanandaji's time. They created agitation when Ashokanandaji was facing a crisis. I am telling you, we should not do that again. All these lake Tahoe, everything is a creation of Swami Ashokanandaji. Without Swami Ashokanandaji, there will be nothing right now. Golima, Lake Tahoe, Berkeley, Sacramento, everything, convent, everything. And when he had a stroke in the old temple, Swami Vedanta was there, he witnessed. People came in agitation and they shortened his life. It was a terrible shock to him. Within 1 year he passed away. Swami Vedanta, the way I am telling you, this is a private duty, so don't worry about it. It won't be brought. But the point is, always do good things, positive things. Reject negative, non-positive things. This is a universal principle, not only in the deathbed of great persons, but whole life. That's why when a person is near and dear ones, whether your grandmother, grandfather, brother, sister, anybody, just take a good book, Bible, maybe the Talmud, or Torah, or Gita, or Vedas, anything, Quran, anything that's meant. In Buddhists, they do that. You know what the Buddhists, the great Buddhist monks, they take out the Tripadakas, not doctrine of emptiness, the original teachings of Buddha. In the Pali canon, they read out. In the Theravada Buddhism, Himalaya Hinayana, you find. So, we have to remember, in practical thing, always remember positive, spiritually elevating, spiritually enriching things. And your question is very important. It's a very practical question. Death is a very serious crisis in the Western world because death is so unpleasant, life is so pleasant. That's the reason. In a highly advanced economy, where you have social security, Medicare, everything wonderful, going fine, then death becomes much more unwelcome. But in countries, in the sub-Saharan countries, in backward nations, where epidemics and natural calamities and earthquakes and tsunamis take a heavy toll of millions of people, they won't take death. Death is not such an unwelcome thing. But in advanced economies, especially in the highly advanced Western economies, social structures, it is so unwelcome. So, it is very important to remember, in this favorable conditions, we should not forget the spiritual roots. So always remember to read in front of them, to talk about spiritual things in the front of them, to chant. That you can do. Even the patient cannot hear or think. You can't even feel. That if you read, if you chant holy things, holy names, that creates spiritual vibration. And that helps the departing soul to reach a higher level. That's why it's always important to think and to remember, to read and chant sacred words, sacred mantras when this happens. What is your best friend? There is an interesting question in the Mahabharata. It's a long dialogue. Who is your best friend? It's a very interesting, one of the most profound dialogues in Mahabharata. So there are different views. One view is the one who helps you in a state of crisis is your best friend. Another view, the one who rejoices when you are happy is a better friend. So there is a dialogue between two great philosophers with strong psychological implications. So the one philosopher says, the one who helps you in times of need may be a friend but not the best friend. The one who is overjoyed when you are in a favorable situation is a real friend. You know the reason? That is much more profound. He says, the one who helps you in times of need and crisis may want you to always remain in a state of want and misery so that he can help you. He will be unhappy if you are out of this miserable condition. She is a friend, but not the best friend. But the one who is happy when you are happy is your real friend. I mean, if there is a choice between the two, then only. If the friend is unhappy when you are unhappy, if the friend is overjoyed when you are overjoyed, when you are happy, that's fine. But suppose there is a choice. On the one hand, there is one friend who is very willing, eager to help you when you are in need of help, when you are in a unhappy, miserable condition. But that person is not very happy when you are not in need of help. When you are not miserable, he is not very happy. The other one may not help you necessarily when you are in need of help, but he is overjoyed when you are out of these difficulties. So the point is, the later one is your better friend. The one who can share your joy is a better friend, because the one who may help you may feel this fellow doesn't require my help, so I must put him back into a miserable condition when he will come after me, plead for my help. So there is a very interesting discussion. Then the philosopher concludes at the end of that long dialogue, comes into nearly 200 verses. He says, you know who is the best friend? The best friend is one who makes you think of God when you are breathing your last. The best friend you can ever think of is one who makes you, helps you to think of God when you are breathing your last. That's why in the Bhagavata classics, the teacher, Shuka, he begins his exposition of the highest spiritual devotional philosophy with this statement. Edavan Sankhya Yogabhyam Swadharma Paridishtaya Janma Labha Parapumsam Ante Narayana Smriti. He says, through Karma Yoga, through spiritual analysis, through devotion, whatever may be, somehow leaving this body with God's memory in mind. Ante Narayana Smriti means at the end you should be able to think of God. That should be the last supreme goal of human existence. Quoting this, the philosopher says, the one who helps you to think of God when you are leaving this body is the best friend you can ever have. So there are three categories. All are friends. The worst friend, because he is also a friend, he is not your enemy. He is happy to help you. But he also wants you to remain in a state of helplessness so that he can come and help you. There is a story. Yudhishthira was one day boasting, Greek king Yudhishthira. Every day I feed thousands of people, needy people. Sage got furious. You are the most wretched man in the world. You are a king, and every day the thousands of people will come and take free meals from you. That means they are in a state of poverty. If you are an ideal king, even if you announce poor feeding the newspapers, nobody should come there. Then you are an ideal king. All people are well fed. There is prosperity in your nation, so that if you distribute free meals, nobody comes forward. That is the real virtue of an ideal king. So if an ideal king says, every day I feed tens of thousands of poor people, the philosopher says, he's a bad king. Because he keeps them so poor, so that every day he can distribute free meals to thousands of people. So people are poor. If your subjects are poor, that doesn't speak highly of you. The king is so bad, so inefficient, the people are poor.
But in some cases, you can't help it.
No, that's true. But here, the point is, these classics these classics present before you certain universal ideas with tremendous spiritual and philosophical implications. So think of this. Who is the best friend? The best friend is one who helps you to attain your highest ideal in life. And the next best friend is one who is happy because he finds you are happy. And the third category of friend is one who helps you. But about the king, he is certainly a far better king. He is far better than some other kings who won't distribute his wealth. No doubt. So he is a philanthropist. So the sage wants to drive home one point. You should not boast too much about your philanthropy and kindness. If you are such a great king, there will be nobody in your kingdom who is so poor and so starving that they will come and take free meal from your palace. So that means you should work hard to reach a stage where there is no poor man, hungry man, starving person in your kingdom. So that is the thrust of the dialogue. So Mahabharata is full of not hundreds, thousands of dialogues. Because characters are also run in several thousands. The largest version of Mahabharata is 145,000 verses. The shortest is 100,000 verses. So practically, so it is interesting, many of these dialogues have got profound spiritual, metaphysical and psychological implications. So I think we will conclude now. We had a very wonderful retreat this time, and it was further enriched by the great questions that were put forward. That gave me an opportunity to discuss. Otherwise I won't be able to discuss these things. Many of these things I myself may not have thought earlier. So really these ideas spring forth. So thank you. Namaskar. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Sri Ram Krishna Pranamastu.